Right. So we've discussed the access interface, the trunk interface. Let's now look at the hybrid interface. Iri rinenge kuvhara karinaro, but it's very easy. It's a sum. It's a sum of Reno act at times as an access interface. At times Reno act as a hybrid, a trunk interface. Right. Let's take this example. Uh, and take the traffic yedu, traffic from PC usually. Vataona PVID yedu panapa 10. What happens? Take grade 10 rovera isco. Apo is acting as access interface ndo zvarinoita. Trunk interface ndo zvarinoita fusi. It does the same thing. Panapa, take the traffic ikauya, it does not match panapa. Traffic yedu inongoramba iri ndo zvinoita trunk interface idzo. So panapa kwadatarisa riri kuact as a trunk interface apa. Ipapa. Zvinhu zvanga tiri kuita kumashure basically. Panapa tati rinokwanisa kunge ritori access apa. Rinokwanisa kunge riri trunk futi. It could be a case. Then panapa apa is definitely a trunk apa. You cannot have an access rakaita kunge iri. Because access haritotori tagged traffic. Access port haritori tagged traffic at all. Right, then toya panapa from inside the switch ndine tagged romecha apa ID yangu robva rabuda re-untagged. Access rinozviita izvo. Trunk futi rinoita sei? Trunk rinozviita here. Yeah, trunk rinozviita futi as well. Then I'm not so sure about trunk doing this, but I think this is an access. Definitely an access interface does this. Then the last one inside the switch 20, it does not match rovora uku iri trunky. So you can see kuti hybrid interface, basically why it's called a hybrid interface. I think you can see kuti panapa pari kuact as an access, panapa pari kuact as a trunk, panapa pari kuact as an access, panapa pari kuact as a trunk. That's why it's called a hybrid interface. By default, ma interfaces edu, they are hybrid interfaces. Kana wanguzoconfigure, you have to specify kuti rufanaita access here kana kuti rufanaita trunk. For vanhu veCisco, by default, madevices edu anenge ari kudynamic auto. Problem in a dynamic auto, security wise, number one, I think no DTP or something like that. You have to manually configure an interface as an access or as a trunk. Right. Example of frame sharing, what? Let me see. Example of frame processing on hybrid interfaces. So let's take a scenario here, interface 1, interface 2, interface 3. Ndo paneka confusion apo. You can see panapa kumanga ma-interfaces anga tiri kuita zvema-allowed VLANs izvi. VLAN IDs. These are not allowed VLANs. VLAN IDs untagged 1, 10, 100. Zvigo zvikuitika apo. Interface 1 if VLAN ID 110. List of alright VLAN permitted by interfaces. Right. I think zvangaidotaura ndizvo. Kumanga ma-interfaces kwanga tichiita uko pasina ma-hybrid. You could see kuti ma-permitted VLANs aya anga ari pama-interfaces epanapa pama-trunk apa. But kana takuma-hybrid panapa patova nema-allowed apa. Why? Because it can act as a trunk as well. Saka, let's say example ye traffic iri kubva from hatina VLAN 10 to 10 manje. it becomes very difficult. Rikaita 10 header is the same concept. Inobva panapa iri untagged, therefore port iri richa-act as an access port instead of as a trunk. Parinosvika panapa iri richa-act as a trunk instead of an access port. Iri roact as a trunk, then iri roact as an access port. Ndikauya ndikachinja, ndikauya ndikangopfekera switch up, then port iri haricha-act as an access, rakutoact as a trunk. That's how my hybrid interfaces work. It all depends. Not on the other end, device really attached to the other end of the link. I device rakaita sei. Ndikaramba ndichitaura ndichavharwa ipapo. Regard skip tifambe pichana. Summary. Untagged frames. Frame receiving untagged frames as a tag with the VID being the PVID of the interface. Regard skip ish. Summary. Togona complicate zvinhu ipapo kudiscover zvinhu zvinyowani. VLAN planning kana kasi kubva just a minute. VLAN planning, let me remove this. Right. VLAN assignment rules by service, by department, by application. How do you assign my VLANs ako? I could assign my VLANs angu different PCs, PC1, PC2, PC3. By service, ndogona kuti VLAN apa i-voice, VLAN apa i-data, VLAN apa i-management. Ndo ndati VLAN apa i-native. What I'm doing is I'm assigning my VLANs angu by the service. So ndoya ndinoconfigure my interface angu aya with respect to the service. Or my departments. VLAN iri ndere engineering, VLAN iri ndere marketing. That's how we assign my VLANs iri. It's not only something to do with numbers. Zvekuti VLAN 10, those are just identifiers. But background, VLAN 10 iri inenge iri VLAN yema-students chete. Mukatarisa ma-wireless LANs enyu, Wi-Fi on campus, you realize kuti pane UZ Wi-Fi, pane UZ students, pane UZ staff, pane UZ what. It could be my VLANs are separated that traffic. Imwe VLAN 10, imwe 20, imwe 30. But anenge ari practical background. Anenge ane names anenge anawo. So it could be by departments, it could be by kuti ndianani i-staff here, ma-students, etc. By application, VLANs for my servers ese munomaisa in one VLAN. My offices ese one VLAN, my classrooms one VLAN, etc. Tips for VLAN assignment. VLAN IDs can be randomly assigned within the supported range. To improve continuity, you can associate VLAN IDs with subnets during VLAN assignment. I think nambotaura nyaya yekuti if we are using interface-based VLANs, you realize kuti inofambidzana nema-subnets aya. So you realize, for example, ndikaita VLAN 10, ndinoassigna network yangu ndoiti ichapinda munetwork this one. Ndoassigna VLAN 20, ndoassignawo network yaya. Kuti zvinhu zvikuitire easy, ma-VLANs ako, they will be corresponding nema-networks nema-subnets ako. Example of VLAN planning, assume there are 3 buildings, blah, blah, blah. In this case, VLAN 1, I'm not going to go through the example irapai. I'm just going to comment pa VLAN 1 iro. VLAN 1 iro rikuassignwa to office users. VLAN to which office users belong. I'm not so sure with Huawei as a vendor. How is it a recommendation yekuti VLAN 1 iri kushandiswa to assign my devices? By default, this is our default VLAN. You realize that hamuna kana device by recommendation rinoassignwa to that specific VLAN. Zvinokonzeresa security wise is a risk. So I think let me just not recommend that. But mamwe ese, you can assign to specific subnets, then to specific users or specific services, etc., etc. Interface-based VLAN assignments, I think it's a repeat of zvinhu zvakatingo taura during this class. Let me see. MAC address, we've discussed this one. We've discussed issue yekuti if another PC tries kupinda up and MAC address doesn't match, then it will get denied, not an issue. Configurations. I think let me end here. We have another session at Netama Labs, but probably just to summarize my configurations edu ndechi. To configure my VLANs, switch rangu iri. To configure my VLANs angu, ese anouya configure pa switch up. Number one, you create my VLANs acho. How you create my VLANs acho? You create them by this command. So ndikaya ndikati VLAN dot VLAN 10. It means I've created VLAN 10 basically. Then from there, you can name my VLANs. I'm not seeing it. You can name my VLANs ako. Kuti VLAN 10, their staff. VLAN 20, they're my students, etc., etc. Another way you could create a batch of VLANs. Instead of creating just one VLAN, you could create a batch of VLANs using this command. So you could create VLAN 10, 20, 30 with one command. After you create my VLANs ako, a port link type access, you specify with interface rako type rip. So in this example, I am interface my access. So no configure pa switch kuti iri access iri access or by default rinenge hybrid like I said. Kana rikuenda switch, then you configure opinda interface mode or configure kuti iri trunk ndo apa point link access. Then panapa wakuassigna port yako its VLAN ID PVID. So ndakuya ndakuti access port rangu PVID 10, PVID 20, PVID 1 by default. Let's put 100 panel. That's the fourth step. So my steps add in short. Number one, you create my VLANs ako. Number two, or the access or trunk or let's just say interfaces. Then number three, assign PVID to interface. Three more commands I don't know create my VLANs ako. Simple. In another case, we're not gonna read trunk. In this case, we're gonna read access. Port link type, we're not gonna set a trunk as well. Trunk or access. Then allowed VLANs. I think add a trunk interface to be to specified VLANs. Up and open I am allowed VLANs here. Then VLAN pruning ish. So I'm not gonna create a VLAN 10, 20, 30. But trunk rangu no and that allow 10, 20. It means VLAN 30 kada upinda. It gets dropped. Allowed VLANs. Then this one, that's assigning PVID to a trunk. We have two my PVIDs are kuassignwa. This one ndeyekuassigna trunk PVID. We have another one irapa ish yekuassigna an access interface PVID akati siyanei. So iri ndeyekuisa access interface. This one ndeyekuisa a trunk interface. Iri ndo rinonzi native native VLAN. Then hybrid I'm not familiar with this one. I think partners with my lab will go through hybrid my configs. Apo. Let me see my configs. I think I do opera. Do my configs at now. Then case one, creating VLANs. I am a configurations. I think we have a lab on a separate session. And then I'm good. Any questions before we close this? Maybe this is a question. I think I did. If the PVID of a trunk interface is 5, zigura izokuti trunk interface the iri. So PVID raro runs is 5, 5. And the port trunk allow pass VLANs 2 and 3. Panapa we allow 2 and 3. Is run on the interface. Which VLAN frames can be transmitted through the trunk interface? 2 and 3. Why? Because in are allowed. If we don't have any questions, I think we can close this one. Pane mibvunzo here. Thank you very much for your time. Tunasangana on our next session. Bonui out.